Welcome to the Hub Roundtable for the 27th of June, 2025. I'm Rudyard Griffiths, publisher of the Hub, here with Sean Speer, co-founder and editor at large. Sean, we are coming up on Canada Day, or what I still somewhat, maybe quixotically, like to refer to as Dominion Day. What are your plans? You're in New York City. Do you celebrate Canada Day with a family, or have you just fully become a Yank and you wait for July 4th to roll
No,
around?
we've gone to some Canada Day events in the past, and we might do that this year. You said that some call it Canada Day, some call it Dominion Day. Let me speak on behalf of our listeners and viewers, Rudyard, who call it the first day of NHL free agency. There's a lot of moves expected in the coming days leading up to the launch of free agency, and so I'll be playing with the kids and checking my phone throughout the day.
Excellent. Well, it is a day also to think about Canada-U.S. relations, Sean. We want to dig into a big, meaty tweet out by the Donald this afternoon, basically threatening pulling out of trade talks with Canada. So let's get into that in the first half of the show that we'll make available to our entire community. And in the back half, let's talk immigration. We had a lot of interesting analysis and reflection in the Hub on immigration with Pierre Poilievre kicking that off. Your big scene setter interview with him on Monday, his first major interview since the election. But Sean, I want to start with Donald Trump's tweet this afternoon. And again, by the time you're listening to this podcast, there may have been another Truth, I think they're called on Truth Social, from the president, or who knows, our government may have responded. But let me read it to you, Sean, because this is not insignificant. Donald Trump wrote in the afternoon of the 27th, Friday, quote, "We have just been informed that Canada, a very difficult country to trade with, trade in all caps, including the fact that they have charged our farmers as much as 400% tariffs for years on dairy products, has just announced that they are putting a digital services tax on our American technology companies, which is a direct and blatant attack on our country. They are obviously copying the European Union, which has done the same thing and is currently under discussion with us also. Based on this egregious tax," President Trump continues, "we are hereby terminating all, in all caps, of course, discussions on trade with Canada effective immediately." The loonie took a nosedive as soon as this hit the wire, Sean. What do you make of it? And maybe just do us a service of reminding listeners, what the heck is the digital services tax?
Yeah, and maybe just for that background information, that the DST, as it's called, was passed as part of broader budget legislation in 2024, although the tax has yet to come into effect. It essentially represents a 3% tax on online firms with more than $20 million in revenue. This would include US-based tech firms like Google, Meta, ostensibly Amazon, Microsoft, possibly Apple. It is, in theory, Rudyard, designed to recognize that these firms have large-scale operations in Canada but aren't domiciled here. It also, in theory, reflects the notion that they are, for all intents and purposes, monetizing Canadian users and therefore should be paying into the Canadian Treasury on their behalf. Estimates range, but we're not talking about a lot of money here. The parliamentary budget officer projects that it could raise something like $900 million to $1 billion a year. So this is not so much, fundamentally changing Ottawa's fiscal picture, but it is of a kind in terms of the way that the Trudeau and now Carney government have thought about the government's role in regulating the internet. For a long time, Canadian governments essentially had a hands-off approach, starting with Chrétien, carried through the Harper years. The DST has to be understood as in a broader context that includes C11, the Online Streaming Act, which similarly forces these companies to pay into Canadian content pools. C18, which of course sought to mandate Meta and Google to pay Canadian news organizations and various other pieces of legislation which fundamentally change the relationship between the federal government and the internet. This one, though, has become the subject of bilateral tension, which, as you say, is spilled over in this major pronouncement from the president.
Well, let's try to game this out because we've known, Sean, for a while that this tax, along with the others, C11 and C18, have been irritants. Previous ambassadors, Biden's ambassador brought this up. We knew that senators were talking about it. So, what do you make about Canada seemingly here sticking to its guns on this when they knew it would be a major red flag? These are hugely powerful companies in the U.S., especially under this president, to the extent that Silicon Valley has come to him in a way that no Republican president has benefited from before. I'm sure there were very direct asks from those companies to the administration and to the president to abolish these taxes. Our officials would have known all of this, Sean. So I don't know, try to put on your hat from your time in the PMO. What would the strategy or the thinking be here? Is this a negotiating tactic? Is this really a red line? I'm kind of confused.
Yeah, I think there's a few different scenarios that I'll put out, and then I'd be keen to get your views. The first, the kind of steelman argument that this is a negotiating tactic, that the government sees it as a quote unquote offensive issue that it wants to retain in the name of trying to protecting itself on defensive issues as part of a broader negotiations, and in that sense, the president's brushback pitch here should be understood in the context of a negotiation. Another scenario is it does reflect a deeper ideological predisposition of the government. I mentioned that the Trudeau government essentially reversed a longstanding small L liberal position on the part of the Canadian government vis-a-vis internet regulation that I would argue has served the country rather well. The DST is part of this broader agenda that revisits the role of the state when it comes to the internet, and in that sense, it may reflect a deeper ideological position, and as such, one that the government is prepared to kind of risk a broader agreement with vis-a-vis the Trump administration. The third scenario, though, strikes me as the most likely. Just in recent days, Prime Minister Carney was in Europe talking about Canada as what the most European of the non-European countries around the world, whatever the heck that means. You wonder if he was in talks about the DST with his European counterparts, and that there's an effort here to kind of pull ranks around each other and try to defend this treatment of American-based tech firms in collaboration with the Europeans. What I think that point of view misses is, as you say, this is, in my experience, a top priority for now successive administrations who see it as a direct attack on the key driver of the U.S. economy and, of course, a major funder of American politics. And so, standing with the Europeans may feel good, but I don't think it's going to kind of fundamentally change the positioning of the U.S. administration as we've seen today.
Yeah, I mean, just to think this through, I mean, what's happened here with this tweet, this kind of unilateral withdrawal from trade talks on the basis of this single irritant, it's worrying, Sean, because it suggests that at least from the president's perspective, possibly maybe emboldened by his feelings of success around the 12-day war in the Middle East, his whirlwind tour of the Gulf states prior to that. I mean, this is a president rampant, as they would say. He's got his dander up, and I wonder, Sean, how you negotiate, because if he's basically saying, in this case, it's my way or the highway. You accept all of my particular demands, including some really specific ones. But let's face it, a tax is $1 billion. It's a tax. It's not great. And yes, and maybe there's Europeans obviously probably want to do something very similar. I get it. It's an irritant for the tech companies, but is it a reason to blow up negotiations? I'm concerned here, Sean, that if this holds and and neither party is walking this back later today, it suggests that we really have a leverage problem,
Yeah.
either real or imagined, at least on the part of this president. He doesn't feel that we have any leverage or we haven't communicated. I've heard rumors this week, actually, Sean, that the trade deal was close. We saw some reporting on that in the news, and supposedly one of the key things helping it along was the Carney government was going to go against, Canadian policy for the better part of the entire post-Cold War era and the Cold War itself, and agreed to participate in the Iron Dome and effectively give up, some of our sovereignty, potentially stationing missiles or U.S. troops. Who knows how it would be worked out, but doing something that probably by every indication technologically isn't going to work, but would still appease this president and therefore allow us to trade on the other irritants in the relationship. But I see what's happened today, Sean, as a worrying sign that something is off here, and we have to think of a way to have a negotiation where you do have leverage. Because if you don't, then in a sense, what's the point? We just might as well ask for whatever their list of demands are and vote on it, up or down.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not a trade policy expert. I don't purport to understand geopolitics and foreign policy as well as you do. I know our listeners and viewers know that. I do know a bit about domestic policy, though. So if you'll permit me, I just want to make 2 points that are a bit tangential, but in my mind, important context. The first is, Rudyard, it's worth noting that the DST itself is just like a fundamentally flawed idea. It starts from the premise that these companies are extracting value from people, which is a similar kind of basic underpinning of C11 and C18 issues that we've talked a lot about. I would argue that these digital companies have made a pretty significant contribution both to individual Canadians and their ability to, do commerce and interact with their friends and whatever, and have made a pretty significant economic or contribution to our commerce. And the fact that a lot of these companies, these news media companies, are now trying to get around C18 after having claimed that they were themselves providing value to Google and Meta in a way, kind of demonstrates the direction in which the value is delivered and speaks to the inherent flaw behind the thinking behind these different pieces of legislation. The second, though, it must be said, I think reflects this broader economic nationalism that we've talked a lot about on this podcast. You'll remember, Rudyard, that the same week we have this flare-up about the DST, we have this announcement of a bunch of Canadians planning to create their own version of Facebook, presumably with various government subsidies to follow. There is this kind of inherent aversion to kind of quote unquote American big tech that looms over a lot of policymaking by the Trudeau now Carney governments, which I think just belies the facts. And in this case, as you say, not only is bad domestic policy, but risks undermining these negotiations with the U.S. and our continued mostly tariff-free access to what amounts to our most significant market.
Mm-hmm. Again, I might not, because we're reacting to this in real time, I might not have this exactly right, but my understanding, Sean, is that the revenues from this tax, like these other taxes or other bills, C18, C11, are supposed to kind of go back into ostensibly supporting Canadian cultural kind of industries. And as we know, especially in the province of Quebec, where basically the entirety of their culture is funded by provincial and federal governments, and hey, different strokes for different folks. I wonder if these things are also having internal pressures within the kind of Liberal caucus, within the Liberal cabinet, that if you start folding on this tax, well, then what do you do with C11? What do you do with C18, the Google money for newspapers? These start to become cultural sovereignty issues, right? In a different way, in the space not of an Iron Dome and whatever sovereignty issues that would represent in terms of our security, but possibly much closer to the third rail of Canadian politics, which is
Yes.
our cultural sovereignty. And, we've had some fun at the Hub and others, the last few weeks about the kind of elbows down, vibes of Carney since the Kananaskis G7 summit. But a lot of the rest of the country, especially in Quebec, especially on the issue of culture, are like elbows up, elbows pointing to the ceiling. So I could see the government in a tough spot here. Like, how do you walk away from these things? If you walk away from this, how do you know he doesn't turn around the next day and says, well, someone just brought to my attention this ridiculous thing called the Online News Act. We're not going to have our tech companies paying the salaries of your journalists. I'm, abrogating any trade discussions with you, and I'll tell you what your tariffs are on Monday. This is, I don't know, Sean. This makes me kind of nervous. Again, you don't want to entirely blame the Carney government here, because I'm sure this is not an easy president and administration to negotiate with, but it doesn't seem like we got any rails laid down. It doesn't seem like the protagonists here are engaging in some kind of structured process. Maybe officials are trying to, I'm sure, create that structure and create that process, but wow, there could be a lot more to slip between, cup and lip between now and any kind of resolution of our trade irritants with the U.S.
Yeah, and I would just wrap up where we started. This isn't merely the impulsive online posting of President Trump, as you
This
say.
is policy. Yeah, this is multi administration policy.
The DST was, if not at the top of the list of irritants by successive administrations, it was near the top. And I would say that this kind of set of issues around internet regulation may indeed been at the top. And in that sense, if the Carney government has dangled this in front of the Trump administration and not committed to delaying its implementation subject to the negotiations, then it was taking on a big risk. And I think we've seen that risk play out now, and we're waiting to learn what the consequences are. I'll just make one final point. We've often said that the Carney government will be ultimately judged, for better or for worse, on how it manages two issues: Canada-U.S. relations and Canadian national unity. One of the reasons I think the Prime Minister has been in something of a honeymoon is there's a sense that the Canada-U.S. relationship has improved greatly under his prime ministership relative to the past one. After this message today, Rudyard, I wonder if that's about to fundamentally change.
Yeah. Well, Sean, let's say goodbye to our complimentary listeners and viewers for this, the first half of the roundtable. We'd love to have you on the second half of our conversation today, where Sean and I are going to touch the third rail of immigration policy and bring you up to speed on some of the debates that we've been hosting at the Hub in the last week. You can do that right now by going to our website, www.thehub.ca. That's where you can get your Hub Hero membership. It's only $1 a week. You get all of our best podcasts at full length. You don't just get me and Sean, you get David Frum, you get our Hub headlines, which reads you the Hub each morning as a podcast, and you get all of our best content on our website. So head over now to the Hub's website and grab your Hub Hero status. We'll send you a link immediately to listen to the back half of the show. So bye-bye to our complimentary listeners and viewers.